Good evening and welcome to another episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Perry.
I'm your host, David. Tonight we're doing our part two of the Expansive Philosophy book, a Blackwell Philosophy and Pop Culture series entry. Last week we did our part one and realized that we had more to say about the book and we should save it for a part two. So here we are. But before we continue, you can find us on Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube as The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast.
That is correct. And as I say every single week, you should find us and follow us because we're great, we're awesome, we're a good time, and we will be returning to your regularly scheduled Deep Space Nine inspired content soon. But as you know, we have also branched into other sci-fi things like The Expanse being our other, companion show. Therefore, this is companion material because we also went through the book series as well. And even as David said, this is a part two of our discussion. We will still not be able to cover every single thing from this 23-page book. You should definitely go pick it up and read it. We've had a lot of fun going over the different philosophies and the comparisons that the various writers have made to the show and to the some of them have referenced the book, not all of them. Some have been really great chapters, some not so great, but still a lot of fun. So I would highly recommend picking this book up and giving it a read. Now, before we get into this book tonight, we always like to give ourselves a little bit of a weekly check-in. So, David, how has your week been?
Oh man, weeks has still been interesting. Um, so I did on Monday get my I got my application in for the job I'm doing, but and I on Wednesday I got the you're accepted, but it didn't come with anything that allows me to access the systems I need to actually be able to do anything. And so tomorrow apparently is when all of that should finally be in, which means I've spent roughly 3 weeks waiting to actually start this job. But the ironic thing is that because it's a sales position, apparently you don't actually get hired on. You don't go on contract until you actually start bringing in business. So one of the things I'm going to talk about tomorrow is like how long should I expect to wait before you guys are actually going to be like paying me to be here?
Yeah,
Because I'm not here just to like fiddle my thumbs and wait for things to happen. Like I need to get paid. So
yeah,
we'll see how that goes tomorrow. Tomorrow's the first day of training. However, that's going to work out. So I'm hoping that goes well. In the meantime, I have been working on the autobiography of Benjamin Sisko. Almost done with that. Looking forward to talking about that one. I do think it's a good book, but it's an interesting book in the sense that as a autobiography of his time before the show Deep Space Nine, it has to kind of hopscotch through some of his history, which is the point. It's not meant to be like a full-on novel of like his time as in the war with the whatchamacallits. It's supposed to give you an understanding of who Ben Sisko was before the show started from the perspective of after the show. So it is meant to be read after you finish the whole show and then goes back to explain who the character is before he became who we know him to be in the emissary episodes, at parts 1 and 2, first episode. Um, but yeah, we'll look forward to talking about that. I don't know if we'll do that next week or something else next week, but I assume we'll talk about that pretty soon.
hmm
Um, so yeah, I've been reading that, kind of twiddling my thumbs a bit, waiting for things to happen at work at this new job. So again, hopefully that is works itself out. But yeah, that's basically been me. How about you? What's up with you?
Bit of an interesting week in and of itself for me. There, work's been pretty steady. I did have a minor work hiccup in that. I guess it was like Tuesday of last week. I work from home, so started up everything to get to work, and one of my monitors just decided wasn't going to work anymore. Just hey, guess what? We're just not. We're done. We're done. That kind of thing. So we just turned it. I turned it on, hit the power button, got a series of multicolored lines, and then it just shut itself off. And so then it was just like, okay. So I had to request a new monitor, come in, had to explain that situation because it's like monitors don't just break, so they say. But I was like, I've had the same monitor since I started for you all like 5.5 years ago. So maybe it's time,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
so
Not like they live forever either.
right. Like nothing lasts forever, man,
Yeah.
and you're like, well, what were you doing with it? I was like, watching it. Like, I don't know. What was I supposed to be doing with it? Like, I don't understand how to answer that
My
question.
daughter used it as an easel on my time
Right.
until I'm on here.
Ah,
Yeah.
I take it skeet shooting out back in between shifts. Like, I don't know what did you think I was doing with it? It sits on the desk, I turned
Yeah.
it off and on. So, but anyway, got that taken care of. The major thing, and this is something that I actually wanted to bring up for everybody, is I, as you all know, I've talked about this off and on. I've been trying to work on my health, being a healthier individual, working out, and doing all that kind of stuff, right? So recently, I was feeling pretty awful, and at first, I thought it was just that I was tired, and I was sleeping a lot more, but I was also having like it was weird, like I was sleeping a lot more, but I was having a hard time falling asleep and then staying asleep. So I would like sleep for maybe 2 hours, wake up, and then I'd fall asleep again for the 2 hours, wake up, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So a lot of sleep, but not enough to be restful.
Okay.
Ended up going to the doctor because it got to the point where I started having dizzy spells. My hands always felt very cold, very clammy, and there was one night where and it was the night before I decided to go to the doctor actually, where it was like I could feel like chills, through my body, like kind of like in waves. And I could not figure out for the life of me like what was going on.
Mhm.
And I know I'm not a medical professional in any regard, but I do like to think of myself as intelligent enough that I can, look up some things, research and things, and with a decent degree of I don't know, certainty and not going down a rabbit hole per se,
Right.
kind of sort of figure out what's going on.
Discernibility is the word.
Yeah, yeah, and not going overboard with it, like, oh my God, I typed in a few symptoms and now I've got,
You got cancer. As
yeah,
Red
yeah,
and D, you have cancer.
right, like that kind of thing. Like I certainly didn't want to do that. But honestly, I couldn't find anything that really fit all of what I had. And that's another reason why I decided to go to the doctor. So went to the doctor. I had already had an appointment scheduled anyway. So the doctor ran a couple of extra tests, some extra blood tests and things like that. And it turned out that I was severely dehydrated. Now,
Hmm.
what's important to note about when they, at least for me anyway, when they say that you're dehydrated, it's more than just you're not drinking enough water. It's also your electrolytes can
Mm.
be in a state of imbalance, and your electrolytes are very important. It's all about, you know. How your body cleans itself, blood platelet regulation, platelet production, like all of these things are tied to electrolytes. Okay, so turns out I was like circling the drain, man. Kidney function, all these things can be affected by not having proper electrolytes, and so I couldn't figure it out because when they said that I was dehydrated, I was just like, I drink water all the time. Even right now, I've got this huge cup right here. This thing, drink two of these in a day. That's a gallon.
My
That's how.
Fire Caves cup
Yeah,
right here, water.
yeah.
Yep.
Well, mine says, it's a P for me. But anyway,
Yeah.
but again, two of those is a gallon. That's why I got it, so that I can, um,
Be drinking
regulate how much
whenever you.
water I'm drinking. But,
Right.
I talked to the doctor, and even then I was just like, I drink water all the time, but I still feel thirsty. I'm still having, these headaches. I'm having, the shakes, all this kind of stuff. The doctor was just saying that it's the electrolytes, and my mine were like not quite depleted, but I was damn close. Okay, so it's one of the like. So I would just advise every person before you start thinking that you are just tired because, or any of these other like were a way to just dismiss it. I would urge you to at the very least go see your doctor and get blood test done and see where you are on all things, not just your electrolyte level.
Gotcha.
Now, we were able to address mine. In addition to what the doctor gave me, there was also some stuff that you can actually purchase really easy on Amazon. They've got a bunch of powders and stuff that you can add to your water to give you the electrolytes that you may be missing. And I'll tell you, at least for me, it worked. It was
Mhm.
like almost a night and day difference. Like I took the medicine, I drank the extra electrolytes stuff, and I finally felt good enough that when I went to sleep, it was full, restful sleep.
Right.
I wasn't waking up every couple of hours. Um, I just was finally able to rest.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I mean, it was very disconcerting to say the least to one, not know what's wrong with me, then two, to find out that it's something seemingly as simple as dehydration.
Mhm.
But then again, more on that scary side of things when it's like, no, man, you're like severely depleted of all of your major electrolytes.
Right.
And doctor's just like, what are you doing? Like, how is this happening to you?
Right.
And I realized it was because a lot of times when I work out, while I will drink water like beforehand, I don't drink water during the workouts, and I hardly ever do anything to replenish my electrolytes immediately following a workout. A lot
Mhm.
of times I wait until like my next meal, whenever that may be. But sometimes because of how scheduling goes, I may work out at 5 in the morning, and then my next meal isn't until afternoon. So that's several hours going without any kind of you know,
Serious
yeah.
replenishment. Yeah.
And, I was basing a lot of things foolishly off of how I used to work out, a decade and a half ago. And once again, it's coming to that realization that, I'm not in my 20s anymore. I can't hold off on things like that and be okay, And yeah, it's just little things like that that will really throw you off. And I mean, I was seriously like just having trouble sitting up for long periods of time. I would get so dizzy.
Right.
And then there's the other things like, you can feel it like on the side of your body where your um, kidneys are, and you can feel this kind of weird pain, tingling sensation, and things like that. And it's just because your body's trying to process and there's nothing there
Right.
so definitely go get yourselves checked out. And I will end all that to say I am feeling much much better. I'm
Good.
drinking the electrolytes. We're good to go. In fact, my shipment came in. That's what I was going to show you. This is one that I found, an electrolyte powder that you can just a scoop, add it to your water. It's got a great flavor. It's easy, real easy. um, I would suggest everybody have, even if you don't do a lot of physical activity, especially if you live in the South like we do in Texas. Being out in the heat will deplete your electrolytes faster than
Mhm.
anything.
Yeah.
And before you know it, and it's the earliest symptoms are so easy to ignore, like again, the fatigue, the sudden dizziness, the um, you break out into a sweat suddenly, things like that, and you just think that it's, oh, you're just hot, or you're a little bit more tired today than normal, or whatever it is. This could be what's going on with you now. Please, again, I am not a medical professional. I am not trying to give 100% medical advice. This is my experience. This is what happened to me. This is what I was able to find out when I did go to a medical professional and get tested and so forth. So, if anything, start there, but it can't hurt to just throw a scoop of this into your water in the morning before you go to work.
Right.
Okay. So, that's it. That's my little PSA for you. Go get yourselves checked out, and hopefully none of you are having any issues as it is. So, with all that being said, since we're not here to talk about me and my medical maladies. Let's turn our attention to the Expanse and philosophy. Now, last week we had named a couple of chapters that we wanted to speak on, didn't get to them because one particular chapter really got to us, as it were. So we're going to turn our attention to chapter 17, How to Be a Hero. Now, David pointed this chapter out to me. I had not quite gotten to this one yet. So I have had an opportunity to read it since then. But David, do you want to go ahead and introduce this one to us?
Well, yeah, but real quickly, we also want to do chapter 5, which also includes Hannah Ardent. Do you want to go and do 17 or do 5? Or you care?
I care only in that I forgot about this one.
Well, it's the chapter that you had like most said you liked early on, so I didn't want you to forget
Oh,
it.
so yeah, that's why I forgot it again. I do remember this one. Yes.
Yes.
So we can discuss chapter 5. This was
Yeah.
the one that was after. This was the palate cleanser for me because chapter
Yes.
4 was so terrible.
Right.
Yes, the banality of evil.
And part of the reason I mentioned it is because Hannah Ardent is mentioned in both chapter 5 and chapter 17. So this is a she was the woman who was there during the Nuremberg trials and gave a lot of commentary on how the Nuremberg trials went, and her commentary is influential in both these chapters. So part of the reason I think we should start with chapter 5 is because when I got to chapter 17 and I saw her name again, I was like, "Hey, we already had someone bring her up. Like, why are we talking about her again?" And then I read on and I was like, "No, okay, this is a good chapter."
Yeah. And I would argue that I mean both of the chapters in which she is a contributing factor are pretty good chapters. So I feel
Yeah.
like it made me more interested in her and wanted to check out some of her other writings, and I plan to get to that. There's a lot of things I plan to get to, but yeah, I definitely appreciate her perspective here. So yeah, banality of evil.
Right.
Um, do you want me to start? No, you go ahead. You start. You start.
Okay. Well, I mean, the chapter "The Banality of Evil," Hannah Ardent and Jules Pierre Mao. She uses the author of this chapter is R.S. Libby. This author of this chapter uses Hannah Ardent and the Nuremberg trials to theorize what the trial of Jules Pierre Mao would have been like. We don't ever see that trial ever on screen at any point. It's always we know it happens, but by the time season 3 is halfway through season 3 is when all of the terrible things with the proto molecule have resulted in the ring gates appearing. So Jules Pierre Mao by that point is done. So his character by season 3 is basically done on the show. He's done in the books. Like, we don't ever really see him ever again. All we know is that he gets tried and his wealth is all confiscated, and that's what inspires Clarissa to try and kill um, James Holden in book 3, right? Yes, it's in book 3 that she wants to kill him
Mhm.
in season 3 because while the Ringgate stuff is all going on, she is trying to kill James Holden. So we know there was a trial. We just never see it on screen. So this chapter is theorizing what it would have been like. And the author, R.S. Libby, let me make sure that is a her. So she, R.S. Libby, the author of this chapter, talks about how the mid-level Nazi official Adolf Eichmann tried defending himself at the Nuremberg trials by saying that because he never personally ever involved himself in the actual killing of people, even though he was a high-level like manager of
Yeah,
resources,
he
he
was
sent people.
he was like the logistics guy.
Yeah,
He knew how to he knew where to shuffle the paper and the people. He
right.
didn't pull a trigger, but he was like, this allotment can go to A, this one can go to B, this one, like, that was him.
Right. Which is a very interesting idea. The idea that, well, I never actually did all of the evil things themselves. I was just trying to survive, is kind of how he plays it. But
Yeah, this, like, the proximity. He's so many spots removed from the what he deemed true evil that he shouldn't be as guilty as others in his party.
exactly.
So
A
interesting,
Nazi
interesting
party.
take
Yeah.
on, yeah, an interesting take on a defense,
Yeah.
and she compares Jules Pierre Mao to the same regard. He's the head of the company, but he was trying to deflect and say, well, I may be the head of the company, but these offshoots here were doing all these things, and I can't be expected to, know all of this stuff. And that's even a point that the character makes in an episode that we watch when he's confronted by then Undersecretary Aaron Wright and of course our favorite there, Christian Avasarala. He says, well, hey, like I this they were doing all this stuff and I had no idea. And Avasarala calls him out on it. They're able to wage a war here and be under
Right.
budget and no one noticed.
Right.
Maybe we should get them on our payroll, is what she says. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting defense for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah. The one kind of problem with the comparison of Jules Pierre Mao to this Adolf Eichmann is that Jules Pierre Mao is closer to Adolf Hitler in the sense of like he was in control than some mid level
Yeah,
management guy. Jules Pierre
yeah,
Mao being like, I never pulled a trigger is very different from the perspective of you were in charge of everything and giving you were paying people to do the thing as opposed to just some paper pusher.
right. Well,
Um,
because we know that Mao is lying.
right,
Like that's the thing. Like he's presenting himself as this thing,
right,
but we know as the audience, and we see that they later, Avasarala and others later discover Mao is lying.
yeah,
He is very much involved in all of the shady dealings that are going on. He's the one that's got Aaron Wright kind of under his thumb
right,
a bit and doing all these things. So he's definitely, if he's not Hitler, to borrow from another person's phrasing here, he's very Hitler adjacent in this. So yeah, there's no way around that for him. Not really.
yeah,
Um, and that is what a thing that a distinction they make in the chapter as well, in saying like there's even a couple of moments where Mao had an opportunity to kind of like pull back and to kind of like almost like he was awakening to the fact that what he was doing was evil, but then he suddenly lost that perspective when he saw the potential
yeah,
of what he was doing. His avarice took over once again and it
right,
overrode his humanity, which makes him again guilty.
right. Yeah, it really is interesting. The scene in the show that really damns Jules Pierre Mao beyond any redemption is in like a few like in the episode before he said, "Oh man, I see how the protomolecule research is like torturing children." He says we're torturing children when he's thinking about it, but then he sees how Katoa, when he is infected by the protomolecule, makes him act in strange ways. I mean, he kills a nurse and starts organizing the organs, and but
What a
Jules Pierre
creepy scene
Mao,
that was, by the way. Just as
yeah,
a quick aside, if you haven't seen it, go watch it. When they
yeah,
walked in on the little boy Katoa and he has effectively disassembled the nurse and
right.
spread her out over the floor.
Try and
Yeah,
understand her better. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That
Talk
was
about
that one got brought me up short for sure.
yeah. And Jules Pierre Mao is like, no, this is too interesting. We have to continue. So, like by that point, we as the audience know that he's irredeemable. Whatever sliver he had left, he just burned it to ash. Um, yeah. So this chapter is just really interesting because of the idea that what level of culpability do people have when they are in positions not necessarily of doing the evil directly but participating in it in a supposedly indirect fashion. Adolf Eichmann, I believe the author says, he was convicted. He was convicted. He
He
committed
was
crimes.
convicted and he was executed.
Yeah.
Because it was basically they called him out on it and they were just like, you're wanting to hide behind this distinction, but there's very little difference. It's a
Right.
phrase that I enjoy a lot, a distinction without a difference. He was trying to play himself off, and even the doctors, psychiatrists who ended up, evaluating him, talked about how normal and well balanced he seemed. Even some of the doctors were kind of envious of just how normal he was and wished that they could, had the kind of outlook on life that he had. But
Right.
the problem with that was he was intentionally keeping himself from realizing the full implications of what he was doing. Even when he got reports of it afterward that those people had been killed, had been, tortured or whatever it was ultimately not his fault because yes, he was just following orders and he was just sending people places. He wasn't killing them himself. He was just following the order to send them to Camp A, Camp B, Camp C, whatever it was.
Right.
So yeah, just as guilty, but
Right.
again,
Well,
distinction without a difference.
and the curious thing again, as the difference between Mao and him is like Eichmann, you could argue that if he didn't obey, they would have killed him as well. So he was just trying to survive. But like that defense just doesn't fly. The author of this chapter says there's she lays out three examples or three arguments in defense of anyone would do it. The anyone would do it defense goes like this. Number one, in my shoes, most people would do the same as I did. Number two, if most people would do it, it's not morally wrong or not morally wrong in a way that makes me blameworthy. And three, therefore, what I did is not morally wrong or not morally wrong in a way that makes me blameworthy. So basically, the idea is that because I'm a part of a crowd and because the crowd would have done, take someone out of a crowd randomly and they would have done the same thing, I can't be individually responsible. And again, in Eichmann's case, you might make that argument. The Mao argument, if they were trying to remake that, would be a little bit off. But the point still stands of how far removed can you be? Well, the author of the chapter actually makes the point of if anyone with the authority and money and power that Mao had was given the opportunity to experiment with the protomolecule, they would have done the same thing that Jules Pierre Mao did. That's basically what Jules Pierre Mao would have tried to do, is argue that the science demanded exploration. But a moral universe demands that that can't be the definitive response to, moral atrocities, that anyone would have done it, or it's common for anyone in my position to do what I did. We have to be able to say, you did the thing and therefore you are responsible for it. Even if you think that someone else would have done what you did, you're still the one who did it, and we have to hold you responsible. And yes, the final, the judgment at Eichmann's trial, she says, seems salient, and this is quoted: "For these crimes were committed en masse, or in mass, not only in regard to the number of victims, but also in regard to the numbers of those who perpetuated the crime, and the extent to which any one of the many criminals was close to or remote from the actual killer of the victim means nothing as far as the measure of his responsibility is concerned. On the contrary, in general, the degree of responsibility increases as we draw further away from the man who uses the fatal instrument with his own hands." So the argument there seems to be actually that the further removed you are from the actual point of, say, putting the gun to someone's head and killing them, the more opportunity you actually have to try and change things, because you aren't there. The pressure of the moment isn't there in front of you. You could have done something without the immediate pressure of the moment. So yeah, Jules Pierre Mao has no defense, or at least from this perspective, this defensive argument. Just because you were, distant from the actual crimes, just because you might have done what you think other people would have done, and they're in the same situation, is not an excuse. And yeah, I hope I summarized that well. What do you think?
Yeah, no, you did, and and as I was saying here in this, we've got an ongoing chat here. I was just also bringing up how this was tying in with Captain Picard. One of the great line that he delivers in an episode called "The Offspring." There are times, sir, when men of good conscience cannot blindly follow orders. So Adolf here in this talking about how he was again just following orders does not work for us as an excuse because again he was aware of what the orders were ultimately going to lead to, and he
Right,
should have, you know, stood up and objected, and even if that would have placed him in, danger, the moral authority was still on his side because what
right,
they were doing was obviously wrong. And the
right,
fact that he didn't stand up and say so is another reason why he's guilty. We see
Mhm.
this also reflected in Mal, and like I said earlier, Mal has a moment where he seems to kind of awaken to what they're doing and the awfulness of what they're doing to these children.
Right.
And again, he falters because he allows his greed to override his morality here. So
Mhm.
same scenario here. And once again, Star Trek is one of those shows I especially with characters like Picard, who we see them kind of agonizing over these moral quandaries in a way that maybe we don't really have the ability to do in real time. We kind of wish that we did sometimes,
Mhm.
but they allow us to kind of give us like a foundation so that when stuff comes up, it's easier on our recall to know what's the I guess the right thing to do here,
Right.
So I really like that we're able to find things like this in Star Trek. And again, that episode is called "The Offspring." That's the one where Data created Lal, and that admiral showed up and wanted to take her away. So
Right. Man,
yeah,
crazy. I'm just gonna quickly say this real
yeah.
fast. As a part of reading the autobiography of Ben Sisko, they mentioned something. They mention events that happen in that penultimate episode of season one about the aliens, trying to take over Starfleet. That pretty bizarre episode, but um, anyway, I rewatched that episode because of the book mentioning it. But there are plenty of episodes from TNG now that I'm like, I need to go rewatch that
Oh
because
yeah.
I don't remember all the details well enough. So now I get why people rewatch Star Trek all the
I'm
time
telling
because
you,
like
I'm telling you, like as a person who has been a fan since I was like 7 years old, you do have to go back and watch it. You don't have to do it every single day or whatever, but like I find myself going back to things that like I'm notorious for skipping certain episodes. But there'll be times where you just got to go back and watch all the way through and you will find stuff that's just like it's totally different from when you watched it 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever it is. The way in which you relate to stuff is different, and it will definitely open your eyes. And we're going to get into more of that as we talk about some of these other chapters. So, do you feel like we are okay on 5 and can move on to
yeah, for sure.
17? Okay.
Want to go to 17 now?
Yes. So,
If you just read it, you talk about it.
yeah,
Yeah.
so yes. I started this one a couple days ago and I wasn't um I don't know.
Initially into it.
Yeah, I wasn't. It took a little bit. This
Me
is the
too.
one. It's called "How to Be a Hero," and this is about Naomi Nagata and her stance on things. And I think the reason that it took me a bit to get into it is because first started to think about the character of Naomi and what especially in season one. And I remembered how much I didn't like her because she wasn't on board with what was going on. Um, and it was very clear from the way they introduced the characters that Holden was our lead. And I get that
Right.
these characters, that was also the point when they introduced the characters was that they all didn't really know each other very well. If they'd worked together, but they hadn't really spent a bunch of time being like friends with each other. So
Yes.
there's a bit of a disconnect and
Yes.
then this tragic thing happens in front of them. They find themselves suddenly alone and very much dependent on each other to survive, and Naomi was kind of a throwing a wrench in what Holden was trying to do. And it was clear that
Yes.
between her and Holden, the others they were going to follow whomever came out, right? Whoever came out
Right.
on top. It was those
Right.
two that were our contentious heads here.
Right.
And as a person who I like when a story gets going. I don't like people who
Yeah.
throw wrenches in that, and
Yeah.
that's what Naomi was doing for me. So to
Yes.
come into this chapter where this was a lot of defensive Naomi and who she is,
Hmm.
I wasn't
Hmm.
quite on board. But the
Right.
more I read it, the more I
Mhm.
realized that one, Naomi's a fantastic character,
Oh
and
yeah.
two, a lot of what she does again aligns with stuff that we see in Star Trek and how they, in particular, view the captains. So now this episode talks about the difference between making and doing politics. So the way that this kind of works out here is basically one is the you can think of it as kind of like the action, right? Like there's a part in here where it talks about Marco Inaros. And Inaros, for him, the belt is its own separate entity. Everything he wants to do is for the belt, but he's got a very particular way in which he wants to go about that. And a lot of that involves hurting other people. He believes that he wants to rule. He wants to come out on top. He needs to make sure that everybody knows he is the best, and you kind of you know, you're wrong for even questioning him. It's almost a kind of a I felt like some Gul Dukat vibes here with this guy.
Mhm.
Um, Naomi is more on the side of making politics to a certain degree. It's not to say that she won't do the other, or no, she's on the side of doing politics is the way that that works. Yeah, I'm getting my words confused. Naros is the doer. She is no, I did it again.
He's the
Naros
maker.
is the
She's the
maker. She's the
doer.
yes. And so what they mean by doing politics is the major part of that mindset is you put yourself out there, you talk about your differences, you try
Mhm.
to reach common ground with individuals, and you try to bring them into what you're thinking. It does not mean that you are going to cower away from a fight. It doesn't mean that you're going to let someone just walk all over you. It means that you are going to try to meet them as a person, as a human. We share this common experience. Here is the goal that I'm working towards. I'm standing before you unarmed, unprovocative, trying to get you to see reason in
Right.
this situation. And
Right.
I will stand here and talk with you about this until you either give me what I want and we both succeed here, or
Right.
the thing
Things
ends,
collapse.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we see this. The one of the main things they talk about is the moment where they are trying to evacuate a bunch of people, and they have a merchant ship, which it can take a lot of people, but because of the oxygen supply, it won't hold everyone. So Amos and Melissa, who's the pilot of the ship, they're ready to just launch. We can't save everyone. Let's not risk ourselves. Let's go. And it's a
Right.
very practical decision. You could almost, it's sad, but you can reason through why that one makes sense.
Right.
But Naomi is able to put all of that aside and be like, I see you. I understand what you're saying, but we still have an obligation to all those people out there. And
Right.
even if we can't save all of them, we can save some of them. And
Right.
we should try. We should
Right.
try. And they're like, if you open that door, they're going to push in. It's going to be chaos. There's no way you're going to be able to control it. You're going to doom us all.
Right.
And she fights Amos to still get her opportunity to get out there and talk to those people. And that's that part I'm talking about. She gets out, she meets with them, she confronts them, and she's not brandishing a weapon or anything
Right.
like that. And she stands there and she says, look, and she tells them the truth. And the reason I love that scene so much is because it's just like so many things I've criticized about shows like this. They don't tell the people all of a thing. There's
Right.
this need to compartmentalize that you see in a lot of shows. And how many times do you find yourself watching them and you're just kind of screaming internally, if you guys would just talk to each other, you would solve your problem. We
Right.
finally see Naomi take that approach, and it works.
Right.
It works, not at first, but her continuing to stand there and do so, she wins the people over, and they
Right.
see things her way, and they're able to save all of those children.
Right. Yeah.
And I absolutely loved it. And that's the making politics or the doing politics. Man, I keep getting those mixed up.
It's
The
hard to remember
doing
what they're
politics.
trying
Yeah.
to. Yeah.
So, because she's implementing it, she's putting herself out there, and she's also willing to make that sacrifice, because if they had decided not to listen to her, she was doomed. By
Right.
putting herself out there and locking those doors, she cut herself off from salvation. Amos couldn't come back out there and
Right.
save her.
Right.
Melissa certainly couldn't. Melissa's only option would have been to launch.
Right.
So she was giving up her own salvation in that
Right.
moment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very powerful scene. I don't remember there being a similar scene in the books. I think that is a show exclusive scene, if I remember correctly. But yeah, that's a very powerful scene. It's also a scene that is one like it demands you believe what's going on because they work hard to make it believable. But I could totally understand how that could have backfired. Like when Amos is like, "We can't save these people. We're gonna." they're just going to overrun us and kill us because they're going to just rush the ship. Like that is a common, I think, a common thing that would happen. I remember the scene from the movie War of the Worlds where people are, trying to escape, and at
Mhm.
one point, Tom Cruise's character has a van, the only working vehicle, and a mob rushes the vehicle, and one guy rips the windshield out with his bare hands. Like he bloodies his own hands to get into the car, and they start killing each other over it. And it's a brutal scene, and that's like the way that I would expect something like this to have happened. However, when you think about the belt and the idea that they actually know that this is true, that Naomi isn't lying, air for 52 people. So, like, I can save 52 of you, but you guys are going to have to work out who that is. It's a great scene. And real quickly, I want to read the passage here from the book that explains the differences between making and doing, because it was
Go
what
ahead.
convinced me that I liked this chapter as I got going on. So the philosopher Hannah Arendt distinguishes between making and doing politics. To make politics is to behave strategically like one playing a chess game in hopes of being able to control the results. To do politics is to speak and communicate with others for the benefit of taking part in the construction of a common world that one cannot control. So, first off, I want to just say the word politics, like I came to this chapter, the word politics is a very loaded word. So I
Yeah.
had to like get rid of that loaded understanding to get here. So I like these two different definitions. Making politics is control. Doing politics is trying to participate with the group to come to a
A
common
common
world
yes.
that you do not individually control. Now, the reason I like this a lot, I don't remember if the author mentions it. I think she does, but yeah, here near the end, so you brought up Inaros. I really like the part that this author was making about Holden. Throughout the
Yeah.
entire series, Holden is making politics. He is a guy who wants, like, he's the good guy. He's gonna do whatever the thing is that needs to be done. But it also means that he's a hothead. He sometimes has trouble getting along with people. Avasarala curses at him. All those things. Holden is the guy who's responsible, and he doesn't want to control things because he's a jerk and wants to like hurt people. Obviously, he wants to take control so he can do good. But Naomi, especially in the first book, especially in the first season, as you just pointed out, she throws a wrench in all his plans. We want him to go be a shining knight, get on the
We're ready for
Rocinante
yes.
and go be, Don Quixote and, charge at the windmills, charge at the
Mhm.
giants. We love that. But Naomi is the one sitting back being like, no, we need to find ways to communicate with people.
Right.
And
You can't just run roughshod across the universe and
right,
do things that you think are good or for the greatest good because there are consequences
right.
and that's something that is brought up later that Holden, because of the way that he acts, it really it leads him to one of two options for a path in which we see later on is that as that more idealistic individual, he retreats into himself a bit because
Hmm.
he reaches a point where he can't do
Yes.
that anymore
Right.
and he has no other alternative,
Right.
whereas a person like Naomi can constantly adapt and adjust to whatever the situation is to be to one continue to be true to herself, but two to still work to bring about a world in which all people can have a voice and have access.
Right. Well, and I feel like the author of this chapter, Tiago Lazier, that he's right, because books 8 and 9, as you remember, Naomi becomes the leader of the resistance
She does.
against the Laconians, and she doesn't do it because she takes power. She doesn't step out there as a knight in shining armor. No, she locks herself in a box for months and acts as the go-between between all these other people, and eventually things just fall to her. She has to take control, not because she is taking control, but she is organizing control amongst
Mhm.
all of these ships and other people. So I feel like this author was right, and he was so right, he was right even into the future with the future books that hadn't yet come out, which is great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and this also exemplifies again my uh, uh, the way that Naomi acts here is also something that we see exemplified in Star Trek as kind of the ultimate sacrifice that we're expecting our leaders, our captains, to make. We want you guys to be doing the politics while we send you out there. That's why the captains are often given so much leeway because it's an ever evolving situation, and the hope is that they will be able to make those kind of sacrifices that forward the politics of that inclusion, of that welcoming people into the Federation. An episode that I was thinking of the most when I got to the part about you know Naomi versus Inaros was the Deep Space Nine episode Rules of Engagement. This is the one where Worf was put on trial because he had supposedly killed all of those Klingon civilians,
Civilians.
and Cisco, well, he defends Worf, and we see that Worf wins his case here. Cisco comes after Worf later on and admonishes him privately in Worf's quarters. Worf's kind of like Worf has withdrawn now and has sulken away. He's kind of Holden-esque in that moment because Worf was very self-righteous. He took the mission with a point to prove. He had been admonished by the Klingons. He had, already suffered a couple of indignities here. He was finally put in command, and he had a point to prove. So in taking the mission and leading the mission, Worf was making politics here. He was trying to show that he was the right person, the right, officer to lead when he was already affected, and he shouldn't have taken the mission. And that's what Cisco calls him out on. And then another thing that Cisco calls him out on is the fact that Starfleet protocol is that when you're in an unknown hostile situation, which is what Worf found himself in, that when the possibility of civilians, however remote, exists, you need to go the extra mile to ensure their safety. And that
Right.
may mean that you have to sacrifice yourself, your
Right.
ship, your crew. And Cisco points it out to him and he says, if you can't make that choice, that sacrifice, you're not ready to sit in the big chair.
It's the
And
Kobayashi Maru paradox. Yeah.
exactly. And so, and it just perfectly I don't think it was until really, seeing the perspective from The Expanse and in particular reading this book that I really understood what Cisco has been trying to tell Worf in that scene. Because we are so used to, again, like Holden, we're used to kind of being defensive about Worf. We've seen Worf's path. We've seen how he's been admonished by and ignored by the Klingon people. We get that kind of, you know, constantly needing to prove yourself. He's a man existing in a different world. Those are not his people. He's assimilated to this culture. He's still trying to, make his bones to a certain degree. So
Right.
we get him trying to prove that while he has adapted to certain things, he is still, he's still Worf. He's still Klingon. He still, has this uh, uh, persona to live, whatever.
Right.
But for him to truly understand what it means to be a Starfleet captain, there's a level of self-sacrifice that is not a part of his character, that he needs to understand.
Right.
And that's what Cisco is trying to teach Worf in this moment. And even Worf, though he admits that like he understands the message that Cisco's giving him, that it's not something that's a part of him yet.
Right.
And it's one of those things that it's such a great moment between the two of them and for the development of the character of Worf that had we gotten more of like a Worf show or anything like that, to see him kind of grow into that and understanding that would have been um, a great kind of rounding out of the character.
Right.
So, and that trait, that kind of the doing politics again, we see that exemplified a lot in Picard. He's probably our, gold star standard there for that. I mean,
Mr. Boy
he's
Scout. Yeah.
yeah, he's the captain of the Federation flagship. It's the most powerful ship that we've seen, and he, instead of rushing out into the great unknown and willing to, shoot first and shoot again later, he very much meets people on this, I'm not here to harm you. We're here to know you. One of the opening scenes when we first meet the Borg for the first time, that's how he greets the Borg. Instead of it being a very ominous threat that the Borg present, even when they are first encountered, Picard doesn't come up to them with, phasers and everything else. He greets them with open arms. He comes with his palms out to show he's not a threat.
Right.
So it's this kind of doing politics mentality has been exemplified in Trek for since its inception, really.
Right.
And I love that I was able to kind of make that connection here uh from this other sci-fi um franchise.
Yeah.
So
hmm Yeah. Yeah. It's a good chapter. I really like the idea. I just idea that this chapter turned on its head the idea that being the hero meant you yourself go and do the thing. Like that is what
mhm.
you would expect the hero to do. That is what Holden does. But Naomi does the harder thing. And I'll put it this way: we talked last week about Amos briefly. Amos is his morality is black and white. He's the morality of the executioner. He's like, if you were to put him on trial for like Nazi war crimes, he might actually get away with like he didn't kill anyone out of like spite or personal animus. He just does his job. Like he doesn't hurt people to hurt people. He does his job because that's what he does. But Naomi is the reason Amos likes Naomi is because she's willing to go into those gray areas of morality and work those things out, and he follows her example. And I just like the idea that that was what this chapter was talking about: is that Naomi actually chose the harder thing that even Holden did. Holden
Yeah.
can go run around after aliens, and even at the end of book 9, you know, do what needs to be done to save the universe. But it
Yeah,
was
and it was
Naomi.
totally fitting with his character that it would have to
Yeah,
be Holden who would do what he did.
literally,
Yeah.
literally, Holden becomes basically the atlas of not just the world but the universe, and steps into that role. But Naomi is doing something that's arguably harder in that, like the Weeping Somnambulist, that ship that she was on, I can only take 52 of you, and I want to do that. I can't take you all. I need you to work with me and trust me, and I need you guys to make hard decisions with me. But I'm willing to make hard decisions. Will you go there with me? And that is great. That's why Naomi and Holden are a great couple, because they're able to be the both sides of the coin in that sense. It's
But
also
I think
why,
it's also important to note that they make a good couple because while they do things differently, their goal is also still the same. Like Holden
yes,
is attempting to do good. Like that's why she wouldn't fit with Inaros.
right,
Inaros, in his making politics, his job or his goal was to subjugate, to come
right,
out on top, to stifle those other voices. He even said it a couple of times that he didn't care about
right,
the inners anymore. He was ready to just exterminate them if necessary to get the Belters ahead.
right,
That wasn't Holden's goal at all. But Holden's way of making politics was, I'm going to take these extremes because I feel like it's the only way to level the playing field for everyone,
right,
not eliminate a whole group of people, but just to put us all the same.
right,
And then again, Naomi had, like you said, the more difficult job of, I'm not trying to eliminate things from you or cut you off from supplies or anything like that.
right,
I'm trying to deal with you as we all are.
right,
And how do we move forward from here so that we all can equally benefit? What
right,
does that take?
right,
So, yeah, that is a much harder job because you're not asking anyone to give up anything. You're not punishing someone for something that they already have. You're
right.
just saying, look, we've basically, Naomi's whole thing. We've done all that.
Yeah,
You've seen where that's gotten us so far, and we're you know this close to wiping all of us out behind
right,
this nonsense. We've
right.
got to move beyond that.
Right. I'm so glad that you're like championing the Marco Inaros part of the picture, because for me it was the Holden part, and the Marco Inaros part had left my mind. So like I'm still thinking about the Holden aspects. So my last thing I want to say is that it's because Holden is the I'll do it myself, and then Naomi is let's get a group together to do the thing. That's why she is so like hurt by when Holden does things without telling her. Like he just does the heroic thing, and that hurts her in the sense that like she is the type who would try and find a solution that the group could come to. But
Mhm,
Holden is the hero that takes on the challenge by himself.
mhm.
And that's why they're a couple. It's why their relationship is fraught in that sense. Like there are multiple times, especially in
Yeah,
the final of the whole series, he says, I need to do something. She says, don't tell me, just do it.
because she
And
knows that's who he is. She even says
exactly.
that. She even says that that's who you are, that's who you've
Right.
always been. You're the
Right.
guy who you just do, you
Right.
know?
Isn't it nice when the authors of a chapter know the story and know what
Oh,
they're
yeah,
talking about?
amazing. Amazing how their insight seems to resonate
Ah,
more when they've actually, I don't know, reviewed the source material. It's an amazing quality to have in your work.
yeah.
Um, but I also, I really enjoyed this chapter too because it also made me realize this is the kind of thing that we, I feel like anyway, we should hope that our leaders, our politicians do.
Right.
Instead of trying to strategize and come out on top and, subjugate another group, we should be looking for ways to collaborate, to form groups, to be, more inclusive of these individuals because we we are we all have different experiences. We come from different backgrounds. We have different ways of going about things. And you'll never know if the process by which you do something is the best way without incorporating those thoughts and perspectives of other people. And that doesn't mean that everything another culture does is always going to be better than what another culture does. It's kind of a way of, like a litmus test for things. And
Mhm.
you can drop away the things that don't work and don't generate the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. And you can find other ways to solve some of your differences and issues and like that. But it takes people willing to meet you and talk to you
Right.
versus coming in and being like, no, 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 I'm right. You're going to listen to me. And if you don't, we're going to, I don't know, drop a giant rock on your planet like an artist did. Like
Yeah.
again, stuff like that. That's the problem. That and
Right.
that's what keeps people apart. And it's even acknowledged, even I forget where it is in this chapter, but the author even says like there is a point where the inner planets, Earth, Mars, Luna, were all in agreement that something else needed to be done. But before they could really start the inroads of talking to people, again, here comes Anaros and just blows everything up,
Yeah.
you know. And so then he united them against him
Right.
instead of the major actual threat that was the threat to the inner planets and the belt.
Right.
And because of the distraction that he caused, it led to them not really being ready for
Right.
Laconia when they finally emerged in full force.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be fascinating to see what would have happened in an alternate expanse timeline where Mark Bonaros hadn't committed his atrocities. And the whole thing that Mark Bonaros says to Drummer and to Ashford is that the inners are going to betray us again. They haven't yet done so with the whole Green Gates being open. They might seem to be working with us right now, but they're going to betray us again. I mean, I would like to hope that he was wrong, that the inners were ready to work
Well,
with the belt. Go
well,
ahead.
so that's the beauty of it because we as the audience, we know that they
Right.
were.
Right.
Because at that time they were being led, or the leadership at the time was
Mhm.
changing, and
Right.
Avasarala was becoming more influential, and
Right.
she was kind of our doer of politics
Exactly.
in that scenario. And
Right.
she was saying, we don't have enough information. We need to do these things. We need to check this stuff out. That was her kind of whole mindset the whole time. So when Anaros is giving his speech to them about the greater potential of betrayal from the inner planets, he was unaware of the fact that Avasarala was already being like, no, we have brokered this weird kind of armistice. Let's
Yes.
not screw it up.
Right.
Let's work to make this better. And if
Right.
Anaris had actually trusted more
Mhm.
instead of being consumed by his own need for power and fame and notoriety.
Right.
What we don't know what would have happened, but we do know that at least things probably would have turned out differently. They would have been
Right.
ready for
Yeah.
Laconia, but he was very much consumed with nope, don't want to hear it. And then on top of that, we get the throw in the mix his relationship with Naomi and
Hmm.
the fact that she's also thrown in with the inners as he as they're called here.
Right.
And not only is she thrown in with them, but she is the girlfriend of like the poster boy, James
Right.
Holden.
Right.
And it was too much for Inaros. At that
Hmm.
point, it was like, you know, he was going to have to strike out, not
Right.
just so much to prove that he was right to everyone else, but also to prove to Naomi you were wrong, forever
Yeah.
leaving me, forever
Right.
doubting me, and that your way of thinking of things is wrong. You are
Exactly.
wrong.
Yeah.
So that's what that was all about. He and like it's so weird because they don't say it in any of the books, but the way I read it, he lost all credibility the moment that he made everything so intensely personal against Naomi. Like
Hmm.
the moment I noticed that shift in the book and the way that he was controlling her with
Hmm.
their son, the way he was adamant about going after the Rocinante, and especially when he found out that Holden was still on the ship, the way that his whole demeanor changed, and it was we've got to take them out
Right.
because that was that connection that she had. I
Hmm.
was like, you've lost the plot, man.
Right.
Like that's kind of one of the things about Gul Dukat as well. Like there are times when you could almost agree with him, but
Hmm.
then when you see how much he became obsessed with the Bajoran people loving him, and then to a certain degree really fixated on Major Kira
Hmm.
and her view of him, and how
Yeah.
much he hated the way the Bajorans adored Cisco but
Right.
loathed him.
Right. Yeah.
You lost it.
Yeah.
You've lost your point.
Yeah. Gold Ducat's whole "Why do you make me hurt you? Why do you make me hit
Yes,
you?"
my
philosophy.
my
Yeah.
children, I just want to, hold you close, and yet you make me smack you down.
Yeah.
Why do you do this? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So again, great chapter. That was 17. We've got a little bit of time,
Yeah.
and I wanted to discuss the very next chapter, chapter 18. This is the intersectionality and betrayal um, chapter. Now, this one also deals with Naomi, which is another reason why I wanted to do it because it gives us even greater insight into this character. Did you have an opportunity to read this chapter
Yeah. Hmm.
as well? Okay. And just real quick to answer the question, no, there is not a statue of Gul Dukat on Bajor. However, don't know why I know this. Well, actually, I do know why I know this, but there are you can get a statue of Gul Dukat on Etsy if you want one. So honor the man, get a
uh,
statue, put it in your yard. You know,
give him the credit he deserves
there you
already.
go.
Yeah.
In fact, you know what? I think that should be something that all Trek fans do. Get yourself a nice little statue of Gul Dukat, put it in your yard, take a picture, and send it to Mark Lima. I think you'd get a kick out of that if you got a statue.
Right.
Um, but anyway, this chapter it's dealing with how to sum this up. It's basically how you can be a member of multiple cultures, viewpoints,
Just groups in general.
ideology, yeah, and yet you have to figure out a way to navigate all of those when you're in a situation where it's not always expressed or not easily expressible.
Hmm.
So now again, this deals with Naomi, and it talks about the fact that as we know, she is a belter,
Hmm.
but she is not living necessarily 100% in the belter world.
Hmm.
She's working on an inners ship, the Canterbury. She takes up with James Holden. Then they're on the Rocinante, which is a Martian ship. They kind of do some freelance stuff. She shows loyalty to the belt overall, at least at first. Like when she gives the protomolecule to Fred Johnson, she doesn't do it because she believes that Fred Johnson is right, but because she didn't want the belt to be denied access or a seat at the table, because at this point Mars had the protomolecule, and I think when she gave it to Fred Johnson, I don't know if Earth had it yet.
She didn't know who had it fully, so her response was, "I don't know who has it, so I got to make sure the belt at least has it." Yeah,
Okay, yeah,
yeah,
that makes sense.
yeah.
And I guess technically Earth did have it since Jules Pierre Mao had it, and
In
he's
the sense
of
that
Earth.
he's
So
Earth. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Um, I really enjoyed this chapter because I feel like this is something that um, a lot of people from different cultures deal with that doesn't get discussed a lot, and it's this trying to figure out how to have a feeling of a coherent identity when you are living in a culture that, or living in a space as maybe that doesn't totally recognize all aspects of your identity.
Right.
At one point, it makes a statement in here about like an individual who, like a lesbian Palestinian woman who, because she's Palestinian, being in the LGBTQ plus community is frowned upon, to say the least. Like I think it's the nicest way we can term that. So
You call being
she
thrown off a building being
I
frowned upon.
said the nicest way. I said the nicest way. All right.
I went
I'm
there. I went there.
Yeah, you did. I was trying not to, but okay.
Yeah,
So
I dragged you
anyway,
kicking and screaming.
yeah, yeah. Well, anyway, it's a no-no. All right, Palestinian can't do it.
Yeah,
So she would then move from Palestine, her homeland, give up her people and so forth to go somewhere where she would be more accepted for that particular lifestyle, which they pointed out would be a place like Tel Aviv in Israel. So, um, in fact, I think the author calls it a gay haven in the book.
yeah, she does.
Um, but while she would there in Tel Aviv be accepted for being a part of the LGBTQ community, she would not be accepted because she is Palestinian. So she now has to figure out a way to navigate her lifestyle, because she is on the one hand a part of one lifestyle or perspective, whereas on the other one she's shunned for something else. So trying to weave through this you know dichotomy of sorts is, I think a lot of people deal with that kind of, and the author uses the term intersectionality, I think is the term that she uses,
Hmm.
for having to deal with these kinds of uh issues that arise for people who are a part of so many different things.
Right, right.
So I thought it was interesting, but I think I might have confused a couple of things there or muddied it up a little bit. But yeah,
No, I think you're fine. I'll say this. I begrudgingly, I mean, I read this chapter with some. Well, I'll put it this way: as a conservative, the woman Kimberly Crenshaw, who's mentioned on the second page of this chapter,
mhm,
is the coined the term intersectionality. Um, intersectionality is something that I can see what people are trying to say. The conservative critique of it is that the kind of the playing out of the of intersectionality is the idea that the person who is the most intersectional, the most quote unquote oppressed, because they're a part of the most put upon groups, would arguably be the most insightful person out there. And so the joke among conservatives is that the dwarf paraplegic gay black woman is the intersectional coalition's the best person you could ever be would be some sort of disabled black you know woman gay like you could just throw a bunch of terms on to someone and suddenly that
because
makes them
because each of these groups at some point or another has faced some sort of oppression or disadvantage. So to
right
find a person who basically checks the box of every single one of those would, in theory,
be the most insightful person to lead the world. So I'll put it this way: I do think there's something to say that people who like Naomi is a character who has to navigate all of these identities, and that means that she's someone who, at times, it feels like she betrays this identity in favor of that one. She betrays the belt because she's living with an Earther. She betrays her son and Marco by not joining them in their rebellion. So there are all these identities that she has to navigate, and she's an example of someone who does it well. I think the conservative argument is that while it may be true that you have to navigate all those things, doesn't mean that you necessarily navigate them properly or well, or that they inherently grant you some sort of moral insight that you automatically deserve to be paid attention to. If you deserve to be paid
Okay.
attention to, fine, but you don't automatically deserve to be paid attention to just because all of these intersectional identities come to play in your life. So
And
I'll say this.
so,
This chapter gave me an insight into the argument for it, which I can appreciate. That me just what I just said is kind of like the conservative like critique on
so
the other side of it. So yeah,
I would only argue that the reason that we feel like Naomi has earned it, whereas some other individuals in our society may not have, is because we have the ability to see the motivations behind what Naomi is doing.
right,
If we were just an outsider, like we often are on other people's lives,
right,
if we were just the outsider and observing these things, it would be easier to dismiss. But
right,
because of the fact that we know of Naomi's inner struggles, we know what kind of man Marco Anaris was. We know what kind of man Holden is. We see the manipulation that Anaris is trying with her, with Philip. And so when she pulls away, when she sides with someone else, when she does any of those things, we inherently can understand what she's doing because we were given an insight into her life that we don't always have with other people. So my argument would be that before we can dismiss anyone who may check 3 or 4 of the 5 boxes or whatever
hmm
it is, then we really owe it to ourselves to try to know what it is that they're talking about. If
sure,
you just dismiss them out of hand because you just happen to notice that they ticked off 3 of these boxes or whatever it is, then you are doing yourself a disservice because
right,
that could be somebody who could maybe not necessarily change the world, but
right,
change your perspective.
yeah,
So um, I would say that it is hard because I just saw a quick line here about identity politics, and I always find that phrase a little bit funny. So to whomever is writing this, before I read the rest of what you're saying, the phrase identity politics I don't like because I feel like there are people who do 100% wrap themselves around a particular image and they
right,
don't do anything to improve a situation at all. They just want to be, identified as a particular thing, and
right,
then there's no substance, there's no depth to it.
right,
But then there are other people who, because of them being, disabled or whatever it is, they find ways to improve themselves, improve the world around them. But because you only see the thing without talking to them, you might not know which one of those kinds of people that you're dealing with.
right,
So again, you need to be willing to talk to and listen to other people before you can just dismiss them.
right. Yeah, I think the argument that I think we both could agree on, is that people's identity are important to them. They color their experiences and gives them at times unique perspectives on life.
Yeah,
That is something that can be good, but it does not inherently give you a moral authority that is a blanket over everything. That
right.
it can give you insights, fair enough. It can give you perspectives that others don't have, fair enough. But you still need to be able to show and prove, not that you know anything, but just that I'm not going to just take you at your word that you experienced X, therefore that means Y. Maybe it does, but just like anybody else, that is something that we all have to prove and show sometimes. And
And then to extend that, in order to prove it, the opportunity to prove it must exist.
yeah,
You
yeah, yeah.
can't say to a person, "You're telling me this will prove it," and then you slam the door in their face
Right.
for every opportunity they have to prove it.
I don't want anyone to have a boot on their back, but it doesn't always mean that I'm going to give you my hand to get up either, in the sense of like, give you authority or power or over something. I You have to make your case first. Yeah. So yeah, this chapter was interesting. It was one that I read. Was like, I have some thoughts, but I appreciate the fact that I got to read it and respond to it. And I know we're probably wanting to wrap up pretty soon, but I just did quickly want to talk a little bit about chapter 21. I don't think you got a chance to read it. Or sorry, chapter 22. Um, so I'll just
I
quickly
mean, I'll
talk
go. I'll
about
go
it.
too because I did get to some of it.
Okay, perfect.
22, you said, right?
Yep, language games in the expanse. If a
Yes, this
lion
is
could
the
shaksa, we would not
yes.
pochue him, which is a using slang to explain to rewrite the phrase, if a lion could speak, we would not understand him. I really like this chapter. It's by Andrew McGrath. This is probably my favorite chapter, or at the very least, as the last chapter of the book. Really liked it and felt like it was like, well, actually, I will say this. I liked it so much because I felt it addressed the biggest problem I have with The Expanse. Star Trek in general presents a utopian vision of the future. We don't need things. We don't have money. We've gotten over wars. Earth is united. We're exploring planets for the joy of it, not because we need things. It's a utopia. The Expanse presents a darker vision. Earth is basically a giant slum. Mars is where all the smart people live, and they're in conflict with Earth, and they're all both of them are in conflict with the Belt. The Belt are all of these kind of individualist go-getters, but they're oppressed by Earth and Mars. However, I feel like whenever I would think about the dynamics of the Expanse, the thing that always got me is like, kind of, how dumb are all these people? Like, how dumb is Earth to get in a fight with Mars, and how dumb is Mars as a smaller colony to get in a fight with Earth when Earth provides the need? And how dumb are the Belters that they can't, just find a way to negotiate with, the other, planets about what they need? They just, all just break down into fighting over stuff. So, for example, like the idea that Earth and Mars won't give the Belters the oxygen and water they need, they hoard it. I feel like honestly, I would imagine it's more just a problem of logistics. Like, can you imagine trying to give air and water to people who are not even just thousands, but like hundreds of thousands of miles away? Like, is it that Earth and Mars are like evil, or are they negligent? Are they
You know,
incompetent?
that's that's. I mean, that's an interesting way to look at it because I have always looked at it from from the standpoint of like the way the colonies were established, like England sending people over to the Americas to establish, the various colonies, everything like that. There comes a time when the trade routes are established, the colonies themselves are established, and while they can make a lot of things there on the colony, there are still certain things, goods, other services, perhaps representation, so forth and so on, that they need still in England.
Right.
So in recognizing this, it became an area of opportunity for people who wouldn't have otherwise had it to kind of exploit this. Oh, you're shipping, English flour to the colony. Sure, they can make flour there, but they clearly want this English flour. They still want these pretty dresses from France. They still want this wine from Italy or wherever it is, right?
Right.
So we are going to charge you extra to get those things, or we're just not going to send them to you at all because in exchange we want your tobacco, we want your lumber, we want your whatever, and we're holding you up from getting what you want until you either give us what we want for next to nothing or free.
Right.
So I was looking at this the same way in this situation. Earth is, having its rivalry with Mars that is, largely becoming more and more self-sustaining by the day. They're both getting their raw materials from the belt,
Right.
and Earth at least is looking at this as we don't want another Mars, so we are going to do our best to keep our, to use your term from earlier, keep our boot on the neck
Hmm.
of the Belters, because we don't want them to realize that if they just kept all these resources to themselves, that eventually they could become self-sustaining. And what we're watching, or yeah, watching because we watch the series and read the books, we're realizing in real time is the Belters are already kind of waking up to that. We would not need Earth or Mars if they had just given us from the get-go the ability to be totally self-sufficient. They
Right.
didn't. They gave us just enough
Right.
so that we would still be in this, chokehold with
Right.
them.
Hmm.
So that's how I always view it. So yeah, it's like it's not that they're stupid; it's that they recognize this was a way to continue to exploit people for their own benefit. And now you have people who are waking up and realizing they it may be hard,
Right.
but they do have the ability to resist and to move beyond it.
I'm getting at is I feel like that. Well, I think that's the explanation that certainly fits with the Expanse as a series. Like that is probably what the authors of the Expanse would say is what happened. For me, the question is like just like how. I'll put it this way: that scene in the show, I think it's season two. It must be season two, where Avasarala and several others like Aaron Wright sit down with the Mars delegation
Hmm.
to figure out who's responsible for the Ganymede incident.
And that's where Bobby Draper comes to Earth.
Exactly.
Okay,
Like
I'm
that
with you.
scene is full of this tension and animosity. Like these people have been at each other's throats for ages. And the thing I'm getting at is like how badly can things have deteriorated where this is the state of the universe or the galaxy or the Milky Way, whatever. Like, how is it that it got to this place? It just doesn't. My reaction when I watched the show and read the books was like, I don't quite understand how that came to be, but this chapter gives me an explanation. So the
Okay.
idea here is that again the subtitle is if a lion could speak, we wouldn't understand him. The idea is like if you thought about a lion, like a male lion, when a male lion takes over a pride, kicks out an older lion, takes over a pride, he kills all the young cubs of the former male lion. And so if a male lion could speak to us, he would communicate the pleasure of conquering a pride, conquering all the females, killing all of the younglings, and becoming the new leader of the pride. And if we could understand, if he could speak, he would try to explain that, but we would not understand him. We would not understand the context, what it means to be a lion. Our differences would be so stark that even though we might understand the words that are being spoken, we would not be able to absorb, take in, and really appreciate that worldview. And that's the
Okay.
argument that this author is making is that being a belter means something, and that means the context of your life is such that you're just at there's just animosity toward the inners. The
See,
Martians have a worldview like we are working hard to make this planet work. Mars needs every one of us to participate. So what the f are these Earthers doing, just sitting around? These lazy bums just sitting on basic. Like the worldview of the various factions are such that that's why they can't communicate. I liked this
so
chapter to explain that fully for me.
I understand what you're saying. I'm just going to offer a different take.
Sure,
From what I will admit, I did not read this all the way through.
sure.
But from what I got of this was, I took it more to mean like with the language being a person can make a statement to you, but without the colloquial understanding from the culture, you may understand the words, but
Right,
they have no meaning for you. I was
right,
thinking instantly of the episode, The Children of uh, Tamar, where Picard goes down to the planet with the captain of the Temerian ship, Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra. You recognize
yes,
the words,
yes,
but it
uh-huh,
has no meaning for you because
right,
you are not a part of that culture. Just
right,
like in this chapter, they were saying, this is a phrase, here are phrases used by the Belters, that Belter Creole. You may understand, or at least you understand those are words, but
right,
without the belter cultural context, it
Right.
means nothing to you. And
Right.
until you're willing to learn it,
Right.
you're never going to get to a point where you will be able to appreciate it. And that's
Right.
kind of what we see in that episode too. Picard eventually gets to a point where he can learn it enough to communicate, but it's still not enough to give him the full cultural reference and significance
Right.
of those characters of Darmok and Jalad. So
Right.
I that was what I got from at least the first, like I think I got through like maybe 2.5 pages
Sure.
of this, and that's what I was thinking of. Um
Well,
for this.
I'll just back up what you're saying. The idea of this chapter is that if your cultural understanding is so ingrained in you that it's effectively, at least in the case of the Expanse or in this chapter, almost practically impossible to understand the perspective of someone else. Again, the Mars and Earth is the easiest example. The Martians have as a culture, as a people, have a worldview. We are making Mars habitable. So the Earthers, and they just see a bunch of bums. But the Earthers aren't bums necessarily. They're in a tough spot. They don't have opportunities. They're overcrowded. Global warming has been affecting the Earth, and so these are people who don't have the worldview of Mars, not because they aren't capable necessarily of what Mars could achieve if they were in that situation, to go back to our starting chapter of our podcast tonight, but because they grew up on Earth where things are just totally different. And so,
Right. Which is, and I think that's interesting that you said, how can they be so stupid when you were first starting this? Because from our perspective, being,
right,
I guess, if we want to say that we're in their universe, we're in their timeline.
right,
From our perspective, they're so far in the future that it doesn't make sense the disconnect that they have.
right,
But for us to give our own frame of reference, it'd be the same as um like a person from, you know, the 1600s
right,
suddenly coming here
right,
to the 21st century and being like, I don't understand why you guys, or like we would have thought that you were, we thought you were going to be doing XYZ thing by now.
right,
Your groups would have been together, would have been more cohesive, or whatever it is that they thought. And then to
right,
see us very different. But see, for us, that's all we've known. That's how we have come up.
right,
So for the way that we are currently, like we can appreciate a certain historical context, but we did not live all that. We are
right,
here in this particular moment. So
right,
these people, like seeing Earth and Mars, arguing against each other, that weird, tension between them that you mentioned, when the delegates come to Earth and everything, um, the way that they are so hostile toward each other. It's like you said, like everyone on Mars after a certain point has dedicated themselves to one very fixed and very obvious mindset. Now,
right,
it can't have always been that way because we know that the people who were on Mars came from Earth at some
right,
point. We don't know how far in the generations they are. Is this the second generation, or is this the 10th generation of people living on Mars? There
right,
is a stark difference between those two people. A person who's in like the first or second generation would probably still, have ties, family members to on Earth. They probably still talked with them, things like that. Whereas if you're in the 10th or say 15th generation, Mars, Earth is just that place. It's there, but there's no significance for it
right.
to you, you
Yeah.
know
Hmm.
so when you look at it from that perspective, you have these people they've born, lived, and died on Mars a couple generations now. They don't understand why Earth is still trying to get them to put them first. Officer Oil says it, Earth must come first. Well, to them, why? We've lived on Mars. We've been the ones terraforming Mars. We've sacrificed. My dad died when they were, hollowing out that cavern that's now the center of the Chamber of Commerce.
Right,
And you want me to send my resources, hard-earned stuff, to Earth? Earth has done nothing for me and mine. What
right.
are you talking about? Like that makes sense to me when you
Yes.
get to those levels of disconnect.
Right,
And so I take that, and then I also apply it to the belt. they're even more removed, further out in our solar system. They're
Right.
suffering from that disconnect even more because
Right.
it already took them probably a generation to even get there, let
Right.
alone establish something mildly habitable. So when the
Right.
time they get a basic dome structure up in the belt somewhere, Ganymede or whatever, or Eros, you know, Earth and Mars have been, they got oceans and whatever else. All they
Exactly.
see is a bunch of lazy, well-fed, fattened uh, Earthers,
Yeah.
whereas they've been struggling forever.
Exactly. And I feel like Earth would see the Belters as these terrorists who won't give us what we need to survive because we're all desperate down here on Earth, living this subsistence, living off of just like the base. It got basic, I this chapter really gave me the best insight into how the dynamics of these characters could come to be that way. I like that
And,
about this chapter because it was
yeah,
the
and
question that
even
I had always had about the show and the
yeah.
series.
Well, even then, I feel like it would be less than that. I feel like, like the Earth would, like you said, they would see these Belters now as greedy. We sent you out into the belt. We sent you with the best that we had, or that we could
Right.
give you at the time, and you're
Right.
ungrateful. Now that you've established your colonies and you're mining minerals left, right, and center, we expect you to pay back what we
Right.
feel like you owe us. And
Right.
then from the Belters' perspective, they're like, well, you know,
We're living on the
sure,
edge,
there's
literally
yeah,
on the
there's
edge.
some of that,
Right.
but it's so dangerous out here. We
Right.
watched in the episode a guy loses his arm,
Yeah. The very first
quickly.
episode.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
he loses his arm. And, it's like, and then you don't send us what we need to maintain our lives or to have even a dignified, lifestyle, but you not only want us to send back what we mine, but you tax us at such an exorbitant rate. We
Yeah.
can't make anything off of this.
Right. Right.
And Earth is like, well, we have to. And again, looking back at all these things, like we have to do it because while we may appear to be this bright, shiny, glittering jewel in the sky or whatever, we've got
Right.
real problems down here.
Yeah.
And we need these things to solve
Right.
our problems. So
Right.
again, pay what you owe. And then
Right.
of course you have Mars that's just like, nah, bro, we ain't doing any of that.
Yeah.
And and the belt is looking at Mars, and Mars is like, we told them no, and we have our own military to back us up.
Right.
Not again acknowledging that they would not have those things had it not been for the
Right.
support initially of Earth. Like
Well,
so,
and then I
the
just like
way
the
that
idea.
they're all interconnected and
Right.
not totally seeing the full face of each other, and part of that being because they are so many generations removed from the initial startups of
Right.
each of them.
Yes.
That's what I think is the biggest problem, the biggest thing that causes their problems.
Yeah, and that this chapter just really, for me at least, really made that clearer than I ever had before. And I'll just to put a kind of bow on it. So for example, the idea that uh, the leader of the OPA, not Anderson
Anderson,
Dawes, the other
Fred
Fred
Johnson.
Johnson. Fred Johnson. Fred Johnson was sent to go quell a rebellion on a station, and became the butcher of Anderson Station. That's what it was. Um, he, when you understand what happened there, the children of the Belters were having mental problems because they were not getting enough oxygen, and so the parents went on strike not because they didn't want to do the job, but because they were trying to get attention to their children's plight. But the company treated them harshly and called in the military. And like my whole thing was like, why is it that everyone's so dumb? Like this is not a good solution. But
Right.
when you think about it, the Earth wants what the Belters are supposed to be working on, and how dare you hold that hostage by going on strike? And they're just like, we just need resources. But maybe Earth is like, we don't have the resources to give you,
And
or
I think
something.
that,
Yeah.
and when I read that same part, that's what I always thought that it was, and it's not necessarily explicitly mentioned, but
Right.
I feel like that's what it was. It was Earth not being willing to admit a weakness,
Right.
a failing.
Sure.
And so then it becomes we must rely on what strength we do have
Right.
because we do need those resources.
Yes.
So we will send in our military. We will send in these individuals to quell this rebellion
Right.
because those materials are desperately needed. But we're not going to frame it that way, that
Right.
it's out of desperation we're responding this way.
Exactly. Right.
And so this again kind of relates back to some other, chapters. Again, if we had more people who were in the mindset
Doing a
of
business, doing politics.
doing
Yes.
business, doing politics versus
Right.
making, then being willing to put yourself out there, to be open and forthcoming about a situation, to figure out a way to talk through a solution instead of
Yeah.
relying on threats, military might, harming children, and so forth, to coerce people to do what you want and then to subjugate them further.
Right.
That would be the ideal result that we
Right.
don't get. So, and that's where you need people like Abasarala,
Well, and
Naomi
Fred
Nagata.
Johnson is actually a great example of someone who went from making politics as a military man to doing politics as a actual OPA politician.
Because
Um,
he learned from his mistakes. He
yeah.
he very much bought into the making politics side of things until he was confronted with a moment where he couldn't.
Right. Right. Where it all blew up in his face. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, I like that chapter a lot, and I want to say if you haven't finished it yet, he does mention Star Trek near the end of his chapter. But more than anything else, I want you to quickly go to the front of the book under the list of authors. This one is Andrew McGrath. So it just turn a page from the first page of contributors to the bottom of the third page, and the last line at the very bottom of page X11 or XII, so 7. Andrew McGrath. His
Okay.
office is easily recognizable by.
I'm not seeing what you're saying.
So if you go to the contributors page
In
and
the
then
front of the
flip
book?
at the front of the book, so at the bottom of page 3 of contributors,
Okay.
it's
Okay.
Andrew
That's
McGrath.
XII. Yes.
And the very
Yes.
last line is his office is
It's
easily
easily recognizable
recognizable.
by the Deep Space Nine poster on the door. He secretly wishes he was as cool as Bobby Draper.
But yeah, the Deep Space Nine reference, I was like, all right, this is our guy.
Yes. Okay.
So tied it into Deep Space
Deep
Nine,
Space
made it
Nine is in
relevant.
there somewhere. Yes. Well, all right. I think that will do it for us. We're a little bit over what we normally do on these, but that's
Can you imagine if
that's
we
fine.
had tried getting this all in last time?
Yeah. There's
You
no
were
way.
right to call it. You were right to
Yeah.
call it.
There's no way. There's
I was
no way.
like, no, we could do it. We could do it.
No way. But hopefully, those of you who have not picked up this book yet, we have intrigued you enough that you are willing to go and do so. You can find it on Amazon. That's where I got mine.
And
Um,
again, they have entries for any kind of pop culture thing you could think of.
we
Harry
will be
Potter.
getting to the Star Trek ones. We
Yeah.
already have one of them. There's actually two books. David's pointed out to me that there are two books.
Yep.
We already have one. We'll be working our way through that in the near future. We're going to get to those as well.
Battlestar Galactica.
Oh, man.
Their
Yeah.
Black Mirror, Dungeons and Dragons, Ender's Game. I have that one. Lego, Terminator. This is just their front page on this book. On some of their other books, the list just goes on and on. So if you have any sort of pop culture thing you like, there's probably a book from them about, hey, let's talk philosophy and that subject. So.
And again, this is the first one of these I've ever read. I really enjoyed, except for chapter 4. I really enjoyed this book. So I would strongly suggest that you go and pick it up. Now, we will be returning to Deep Space Nine and Deep Space Nine related content. I'm not 100% sure that we will be doing the autobiography
Autobiography, yeah.
of Ben Sisko next week. Might want to kind of give ourselves a little bit of a break and actually return to some episode based content, doing some favorite moments or favorite episodes or least favorites.
Still going to do Nemesis as well. We talked about
Yeah, we
doing
still got to do the
Nemesis.
movie Nemesis. When it comes to Star Trek Voyager, I'll talk with you, David, later as to whether or not we actually want to go into coverage of that show or not. Just for you newbie folks, David has never watched. He had never watched Deep Space Nine. That's why we did this. He has not watched Voyager, so we may do the same there and make a comparison of the two shows. I don't know. Lots of things to discuss there, so there's plenty of material for us to work with. Don't worry about that. But next week, most likely, we'll be doing some kind of favorite moments type stuff for us.
Right.
All right. That's it for now. Guys, Like always, until next week, take care of yourselves.
Thanks, guys.